All right, and here we go. Hold on, make sure we're recording. 1 minute. I thought it just said something. Hold on. Are we recording? Okay, we're recording. Okay. It doesn't have the recording thing on anymore. That's troubling. Okay. Anyway, we are recording now according to the update. So, yeah, now we are. Okay, here we go. Let's roll. All right. Hey, everyone. It's Julie Johnson and Natasha Babler from the Special School District Social Emotional Inclusion Program. We are doing a live recording, or not a live recording, a recording, not even live, a pre-recorded actually, recording of a previous live training we did of norming social experiences with mainstream technology for students with low incidence disabilities for virtual and in-person learning. But this also pertains to really, all learners to a certain degree, right? So that's where the social emotional inclusion piece comes in for us. So if you see the words low incidence disabilities, just know that you can insert that for really any child with neurodiversity, so, and any teacher really can benefit from the information. So I want to try to keep our worldview open here. So anyway, Natasha.
Yeah, so welcome everybody. And as Julie said, really the things that we're going to talk about here today are universal. We're going to use a lot of examples involving assistive technology that is in the experience of somebody with social emotional learning needs who also has low incidence disability, blindness or visual impairment, particularly for a lot of our examples. But know that these concepts and these tools can be applied to any piece of ed tech, any piece of really general life. If there's something even that a parent is trying to teach at home that's a life skill, a lot of this is very transferable. So keep your box wide open.
Yeah. All right. So let's start. So Natasha and I have been doing quite a bit of training on this in the Ferguson Florissant School District and North County, St. Louis districts over the course of this spring, and definitely as we've started practicing social distancing and online virtual learning, we've really been asked to combine our knowledge of educational technology, assistive technology, and social emotional learning, and yoga and mindfulness and circles, all of that. And so we have broken this down to the mindfulness and the mindful use of technology components of the social emotional inclusion program that we are offering in North County, St. Louis right now, and for virtual trainings as well. So we've taken a poll over the last 6 months or so with teachers working, general education teachers nationally and locally here in St. Louis, to ask kind of what their comfort level is with embedding educational and assistive technology, which they're kind of different, but not too much. But we're really talking about ed tech here, just so for those of us that know the difference, that's kind of what we're talking about. So you're here when we say mainstream technology. So it's your normal stuff you see in a modern classroom, right? These days, or even a traditional classroom these days has many of these things that we're talking about. So a smart board, maybe a tablet, a Chromebook, that's the technology that we're talking about here, okay? So the current need that we see for teachers, based off the survey, is that where we ask them how they feel about embedding technology into the classroom, and that includes assistive technology. How do they feel about meeting the needs of multiple students with diverse learning needs? I was like, I don't know how else to say this, but how do we meet those needs, right? With different brains and different bodies, and how can we do that? So here's what they said. So 78% of respondents were very aware of the outside factors contributing to the students' abilities to learn. So that's good news. That means that there's awareness to at least many of the teachers we work with, and even the ones that we have contact with on a national level, know that students learn differently. Great. We've got, that's awesome. 100% of respondents said that they understood how a student's behavior at school might be impacted by things they experience outside of school. So that's like the trauma piece, and understanding that students do have like autism or Asperger's or different brains, and those might impact the way that they are able to engage with other teachers, other peers. Everyone got that. Awesome. Now here's the area of need right here, okay? This is why we're doing this training. 44% of the teachers felt comfortable implementing assistive technology with their students. So as an assistive technology specialist, which I forgot to say that part about me, but many of you know me and know that already, so that's news to you. I'm an assistive technology specialist. 44% felt comfortable implementing assistive technology for their students that required assistive tech, which is the technology that you use layered over the assistive tech. So what did I need to even access the Chromebook? Those magnification tools, those switches, you know, to access the Chromebook, right, that all my other students are using. So only 44% of teachers felt comfortable implementing that. Okay, that raised some red flags for us. Then 50% said they didn't have enough tools to adequately address the need for social emotional inclusion within the school setting. So with those two needs in mind, we set up this little level 1 training to just dip our toes in the water about what is needed, we feel like, especially now in the face of online learning and access issues, because every student, regardless of, you know, what their abilities are impacted by access issues now, okay? Not even physical access issues, but also instructional access, right? So nobody is left unbarred by that so impacted by that. All right, so how do we bring in social emotional inclusion with technology? Well, we start with CASEL's social emotional learning standards, right? Which is kind of a really broadly used framework used in a lot of schools to help implement social emotional learning standards in the general education curriculum. So you can just Google CASEL and social emotional learning standards and you will find these, okay? And they have a whole bandwidth of how you can, and a whole framework of how you can implement these standards as well as a curriculum. So this is just the beginning part, right? So self-awareness. So they're saying that students, they would like all students know their strengths and limitations with a well-grounded sense of, hold on a second, confidence, optimism, and growth mindset. They would like students, they see that students need to have a sense of self-management by effectively managing stress, control impulses, motivating yourself to set and achieve goals, which is great. We need adults to do that too. That's a whole level 3 training. Social awareness. We want students to understand their social needs and understand the perspective of others and empathize with them, including those from diverse backgrounds and cultures. So we want the CASEL saying that all students should, to the degree that their brains allow them to, want them to take in diverse ways of being in the world and bringing that into awareness, okay? Whether that's through the lens of disability, the lens of racial and ethnicity awareness, socioeconomics, etc. Okay, just understanding that there are different ways that people are in the world and learning to build acceptance, tolerance, and hopefully then affirmation. Relationship skills, again, being able to communicate clearly, listen well, cooperate with others, resist inappropriate social pressure, negotiate conflict constructively, and seek and offer help when needed, all right? Those also are things that need to be taught and modeled based off CASEL and what we're saying as well. And another thing that we're looking at is responsible decision-making, right? Making constructive choices, being able to self-advocate for needs based on ethical standards, safety, and social norms. So those are all the things that we are saying that any child, you know, based on where they are developmentally, you know, can be learning in the school system and should be learning, right? And we can use technology to help get us there. So For those of us, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here because I don't think we have a ton of TBIs, but I do want to just say that for those teachers of the visually impaired that are here, CASEL does end up supporting the needs, learning needs and social emotional needs of the expanded core curriculum, as well as recreation and many other of those 9 components. So if you want to take some time here to talk about, see the cross, the integration of those two, so you can see our cross-referencing there. Okay. So signs of emotional learning needs among students with low incidence possibilities. So Natasha, I'm gonna read the slides, but then if you want to go on to that a little bit more, I'm gonna let you speak from that. Okay.
Gladly.
So I'll read them, and if you want to talk about any other ones in depthly, let's go with that. Sound good?
Awesome.
Okay. So signs of social emotional learning needs among students with low incidence disabilities, but not specific to them either. So prefers to talk to adults over peers.
This is one that is probably among the most prevalent and the hardest to draw the line between an actual social emotional learning need or a social emotional experience need and just a kid who is highly linguistic. Because kids who are also highly linguistic will talk to people who are on their linguistic level, which may or may not be their peers. So when you're looking at the role that this behavior might play in determining, is this a social emotional need for peers? Is this a social emotional need because of something else in the environment? It's really important to pay attention to the details and the nuances in the situation and in the learner's behavior. And I use the term learner because we're always learning ideally. We're in a situation where we might be looking at this as adults, as teachers, as educators, and watching this in our own behavior. We prefer to talk to people who are more experienced or older than us in any given circumstance. So when you're talking about languaging in particular and reaching out to peers or not engaging with peers, and it can get tricky when there's cross disability instance, and maybe a primary levels of interaction for a student might be with other people who primarily have language disorders, and that individual doesn't have language disorders, so they engage more with the teacher. And that's going to put them in a position where they look like there's a social emotional learning need when there's really just a social emotional exposure need, and which could be considered a learning need, but it could also stand alone. You're not going to feel comfortable talking to peers if you never have the opportunity to talk to peers.
Great. All right, next one is struggles to self-advocate for needs and wants.
Self-advocacy is something that everybody does to a degree, but we have a higher expectation of individuals who are living with disability and impairment to be able to self-advocate from a much earlier age. We ask typically developing and typically experiencing young children to self-advocate for likes and dislikes, but not necessarily needs. We tend to ask them if they're hungry, for example, rather than requiring them to volunteer that kind of information. Where a student who has a disability, we're asking them very early on to remember, as early as preschool, kindergarten, to remember to ask their teacher for their magnification device or their assistive technology, whatever that might be. And putting some of that responsibility onto them in a way that makes them look different and feel different than the people around them. And so understanding and helping everyone around them understand the function of that technology is a big piece of working with this.
Yeah. So the next one is resistant to using accommodations, modifications / assistive technology around others, period.
Yes, so true. A lot of the time we have seen both in our work and I've seen in my real world experiences as an individual living with multiple impairments that I and my friends and my students and my learners and their parents are all more likely to use a piece of technology that also functions as assistive technology if it looks like what other people are using. If it looks like some alien created contraption, then there's going to be some resistance in place because it's not mirrored. And this very much parallels a lot of what we see in other minority groups, where your experience, your role, your whatever is more seen as an option, that you're more receptive to it if you've seen it out in the world around you. So seeing somebody else model the use of something that looks weird, and you might be more likely to use what's weird, but if you use what looks like everybody else and you just use it differently because that tool is designed a little more universally, there's a little more receptivity available.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then challenges managing anxiety.
I could spend an hour on this one alone. But a lot of the anxiety around technology is finding the balance of what has been deemed appropriate use of technology and inappropriate use of technology, and the others around a learner's ability to monitor that use. Is it being used in a socially expected way or a socially unexpected way? Is it being used in a way that's helpful or a way that's distracting? And trying to manage all the anxieties around that is just another ball we're asking our students to keep up in the air.
And then lacks language around talking about their disability with peers and really teachers, everyone, others.
lacks language around talking around their disability, period.
Right.
And this one I see so often. And I see it not just in individuals who are living with disability, I also see it in the individuals who are around supporting us, who may not have degrees in special education or rehabilitation counseling or other disability-centric fields. It's even in the world, if you think about it, the world of rehabilitation counseling, which is where a bulk of my education was, is one of the only disability-related fields that hashes out the difference between an impairment, a disability, and a handicap. And if you don't even know which adjective to use in which situation, how are you going to address the issues? And so you're going to bring that down to the level of, an elementary school learner, for example. They need to be taught what the name of their impairing condition is, the condition that's present. So what is their impairment and how does that manifest in their body? They need to be taught when that's manifesting as a disability, when that's being placed upon them as a handicap, and then how to assess that as they're trying to also learn. We're asking a lot of neurology here on a developmental level for students, and really everybody getting to a place where you can start putting those words together. And so one of the ways that I tackle this in the program really and truly is with some role playing, and then some actual practice, bringing in a peer who does not have the same disability as my learner, and getting them together and letting them practice just articulating and using those words, explaining what the impairment is behind their disability, explaining their accommodations. And the hope is that by the time a learner gets to late middle school, into high school, and certainly before they're approaching higher education, if that's where they're going, they have a firm grasp of how to explain their impairment and their educational needs, because they've gotten the confidence, because they've said it enough that it's now a part of their story.
Yeah, that's a really good point about practicing using the language, for sure. It's like rehearsing, practicing.
Well, we never ask a Broadway actor
right
to go perform off script without having read the play.
Right.
Why would we ever expect that of a student?
Right.
Because that's what we're asking of them.
And it needs to be modeled to them. I mean, that's one thing, we talk a lot about on Integrate is we have to model the things that we ask students to do here in social emotional learning. Is we can't expect students to speak like adults when we don't model it, the adults don't model it to them. So,
Well, and if a student has never met somebody else living with a disability, they don't actually have it modeled. An able-bodied person can give them all the language in the world without the stories.
mm-hmm.
And without the stories, that generalization is much harder to acquire.
Yeah. So that's the importance of social stories. You just reminded me of that. That's
social stories go one direction. A social story told by a person who shares the disability being portrayed in the social story goes to a whole different exponential level of power.
Yeah, totally. All right. Okay. Okay, so let's check in here. This is let's take a moment to check in. So grounding, figuring out where we're at. Go for it, Natasha.
So I just gave you a lot of information that may be pretty new to you. So just take a moment and give your brain an opportunity to start making the transfer of that information to something that's going to stick. So maybe find a comfortable seat or shift your seat, sit up nice and tall, or let yourself relax if you've been leaning forward, and just notice the placement of your feet. Notice if your feet are flat on the ground because you're sitting in a chair. Are you sitting on the floor and your legs are crossed? So your ankles and your feet are in a very different orientation to the ground. Just notice if you're feeling any kind of tension in your feet. Maybe wiggle your toes or move and roll your ankles. Bringing your awareness to that fine movement with extremity. Maybe you try and move your ankles in 2 different ways, or alternate pointing and flexing one foot at a time. Just noticing what that sensation feels like, bringing you into your body and out of that place in your mind where you're trying to focus quite so hard on pulling in information. When you're ready, come into stillness and bring your attention back to your screen.
Ready to go?
Yep.
Oh. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna take this down so I can read. Okay. Meeting social emotional learning needs with mainstream technology. So how do we bridge this need for inclusion and our current and ever evolving need for mainstream technology to just be able to support the structure of the school system right now, and I think for the incoming future, for the indefinite future, for sure. So how do we do that? So before bringing assistive technology into the classroom, consider taking the following questions. So we're talking about technology into the classroom, but also online, which we're going to get to here in a bit. So 1, here's what we can ask ourselves. What technology is already being used by the classroom teacher and peers, right? So this is these kind of questions are for maybe any related service provider or, any related service provider that brings any sort of piece of equipment into a classroom, okay? So these are just questions to ask. What tools are being used by peers that may be functional for the student, even if not ideal for the student, right? So sometimes—
That's a huge piece. That is really huge.
Right. I think we need to just talk about how sometimes I think those of us that are able-bodied tend to look at it through a clinical lens and what has been told to us by the medical community or and from a biomedical perspective. And we're not always taking in the social emotional inquiry about how the student that might dictate our decision making in this situation into a different lens, right? So for me, I'm just going to speak as like, as, you know, someone that has to make that decision a lot, is how, because lots of times, especially as a teacher of the visually impaired, I go into technology evaluations with some of my students, and people keep looking at my student who has an acuity of 20/600 and still uses her teeny tiny screen Ruby, or like handheld magnifier, which is about the size of an iPhone. Okay. If you can picture that, it's like someone who, but it works for her, and as long as she can make it work and it's functional, I don't fight it. But I end up having to have really intense conversations with some, people in the low vision field and ophthalmologists about why we need to look at devices that may not be optimal for where they are functionally in their vision, but it's where they are emotionally with their ability to, accept, use the device wherever they are emotionally in their process. And then also meeting where they are, in what they're able to access and see and be functional in a task. So do you want to speak more to that, Natasha?
Yeah, so particularly with a student who has very low vision, there's the tendency to want to assume that Braille is going to be the most effective medium of learning for them, even if their low level of vision is not diagnosed until, say, middle school or high school.
Mm-hmm.
That, they have to have Braille, they have to have Braille. And I'm going to say something a little bit unpopular here and say that they have to have exposure to Braille. They do not need to become fluent and use Braille as their learning medium. Mm-hmm. If they're using what works for them, if you're trying to learn a new language and learn in that language at the same time, it doesn't happen. And if there are any English language learner instructors who happen to be hearing this at any point, I think you can probably agree with me to a level that trying to teach a student Spanish by only speaking to them in Spanish isn't going to get you as far. They're not going to learn as much Spanish for an older student than they would from a younger student. And so a lot of the time people try and force what they think is the long-term best solution onto a student when the student is in the place of, well, I'm not going to use that. So we have to look at what are they willing to use, because anything that they use is better than not using anything at all.
Yeah, good point. For sure. So, and then also something to ask is, what apps, websites are general education teachers using that could engage peer-to-peer student learning? So again, that just kind of goes into, if I'm seeing someone else use this device in my classroom that may or may not, share a lived experience, whether that's, through a physical disability or through some other unseen disability, seeing someone engage in the world in that same way can help bridge a sense of normalcy to the need for technology and the need for tools, right? So someone that needs to use a dictionary, that's a tool. And you can normalize, and we'll get into this later, but you can normalize, the aspect of using tools for kids that have needs for mainstream technology and those that have need for assistive technology. And then for what tools is the student naturally drawn towards and curious about? So that's kind of all the questions we're asking ourselves when we take into this inquiry for meeting a student's social emotional learning needs with mainstream technology. Just bringing that lens in, that kind of whole person lens when it comes to technology evaluation. Okay, so mainstream, did I skip one? No, I didn't. Okay, mainstream devices to support social emotional learning in person. We don't know what that means yet, but that will mean something different in the fall. So than what it's been in March. We know that. It'll look different because of social distancing, right? So these are kind of the mainstream technology I know that my students are have always used in the classroom, the iPad and the Chromebook, right? So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time breaking this down because I think this table is pretty self-explanatory, but essentially the way to read it is over here in the blue column, it says accessibility tools. Sorry, the yellow column, here's the technology. In the blue column, it says, what are the accessibility tools each device offers? Then facilitating SEL engagement. These are some different ways, which I'm going to break those down, and I'm going to spend more. I want to spend more time on this facilitating SEL engagement piece, and then the CASEL skills that using these devices can support. Should you merge, using mainstream technology to support social emotional inclusion, and then any miscellaneous technology AT you might need for students that require the assistive technology to access the mainstream device. So, okay, moving forward to that. That's for in-person learning. Oh, and the smartboard. Oh yes, smartboard. I haven't had to use the smartboard in forever, so I kind of am like, oh yeah, that's a thing. So the smartboard is also another way to, you can also figure out ways to access and bring students together to access from one device. It actually is a really good, modification to bring universally designed instruction for sure in the classroom. So if you don't use a smartboard, I think a lot of teachers do, but if you don't, even in it, I would look into that, especially if you're interested in universal design for learning. It's a powerful tool. We use it a lot in some of the schools I work at. Okay, so mainstream. Hold on a second. Okay, what we use for mainstream, right? So right now in our virtual learning, we are using a combination for what I've seen and what I've been trained in, Seesaw, and again, it's going through that same whatever categories that I went through here. You can definitely peruse those and I think put 2 and 2 together here. Google Classroom, Google Meets, those are some that we're also using that I think Google Classroom is really accessible to not really kids with visual impairments and their needs necessarily, but to the way a child's brain looks and the way a child's brain functions. So I've had some interaction with a couple of other learning platforms that are meant for like secondary learners, but they're expecting other students, like young students, to use those. And it's just been really challenging. And I think Google Classroom has its pluses and minuses for sure. But one of its big pluses is that the kids know many students know the Outlook, the layout of Google, because a lot of them have email addresses, and they're able to easily access the Google Classroom layout really easily because they know the Google interface. So that's like a big plus to Google Classroom. Yeah, that's all I will say about that. And then Zoom, of course. Oh, and the other thing to Seesaw that I will say is Seesaw's great because if you use Seesaw, you can easily schedule Zoom calls within Seesaw. So each one has its perks and, minuses. So if you want to talk more about minuses, I'm happy to. You can email me and find that out. So, but right now I'm just going to kind of talk about the perks. So, and then Zoom, of course, is something what we're using right now. So it's like popular. I hope you bought some stocks on Zoom a year ago. I'm sure you're getting rich right now. So anyway, so here's kind of where the pluses and minuses of Zoom as well, in terms of how it, not minuses, but how you can adapt it. And there are quite a few pitfalls to it, but we can talk if you have more questions about that, feel free to reach out to Natasha and I to talk more about that in depth. Okay, so Natasha, go for it. Check-in moment.
All right, so lots of charts that you just stared at, and I'm going to draw upon the color representation there to use that. Think about which of those colors in those charts came to mind for you right now. Just whichever one popped into your head first is fine. Think about that color. Let that color fill your awareness. And for some people, it's easier to do this exercise with your eyes closed or lowered to half mast. That's fine. Letting the color just take over your presence. Notice if you start to get any emotional sensations that link to your experience with that color. Does that color bring a sense of calm? Does that color make you feel a sense of chaos? Maybe think about the things that you encounter that naturally contain this color. Any of those things that might be in the space that you're occupying as you watch this training. Notice if that color brings any physical sensation to your body, particularly as you check in on an emotional receptivity level. Maybe what was the material in the column that was that color? You can bring that into your mind. Let that kind of settle in. Just a general topic. Associating that with that color, maybe, maybe not. Taking a deep breath in, slowly let it out. Notice the sensations as they drift off. And you rejoin us back at the screen, lightly blinking your eyes open if you had them closed.
All right, moving forward. All right, so what is a tool you can use in the classroom? And to a certain degree, I think there are ways you could use this virtually. I have not tried it yet, but I think you could look at using Osmo to promote social emotional skill building for sure. So, you know, using the concept of gamification, which commonly employs, you know, design elements to improve engagement and organize productivity. You know, game concepts, there's a goal, you know, games, you know, it's the learning where people don't forget their learning, essentially, you know, gamification, really simply drawn out, doesn't necessarily have to mean technology, but we do bring gamification in a lot of ed tech. So Osmo really brings together real life manipulatives and technology, right? And mainstream use of technology. So they offer collaborative play supports for students in learning words and phrases to express themselves when facing challenges. So they have like these these kind of pretend play restaurants, virtual restaurants, you know, that you can play in real life. I know that they were talking about doing virtual learning aspects of it when this whole thing happened. So I'm sure they're always evolving. So I'm sure they'll find something to meet the needs of their product and students right now. So pay attention to that. You know, kids can role play while using Osmo's pretend play games. You know, like this is the pizza shop. I think they have a couple of other options for that in this realm as well. And collaborative play also assists students in picking up interpersonal skill sets through multiplayer games. So Osmo really speaks to why we still need play, right? And they also bring in technology to help support that because, you know, our students, especially now, you know, can't necessarily access community right now, especially as we record this, we're practicing social distancing, but, you know, and it's not just now, many of our other students just have, for many reasons, don't have, you know, ease of access to the community. So that's where this pretend play can be really important in building social emotional awareness and also giving exposure to mainstream technology. Natasha, do you want to say anything to this?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Okay. So facilitating opportunities to explore access tools in the classroom as well. So another option wait, did I do this? I did Osmo. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I did. Okay. Okay. So students, another thing we can use besides Osmo is using the book creator tool on the Chromebook. And students can collaborate either using an iPad or a Chromebook because they have a pretty good, for a Chromebook, which isn't always my first tool or go-to, but a lot of my students like using it. So that makes, you know, that's their preference. So then, or it becomes the tool I'm working with. So in many cases, not all cases, but in many, sorry. So something's my eye, you guys. And so, you know, this book creator has created a really great platform where students can work with other students to create books, dynamic books, you know, and comic books and all kinds of cool things. And if you use it with the Chromebook, it's almost all the universal tools can easily be integrated with the extension, with the Chrome extension. And same with the iPad app, which I've used with many of my students. Actually, my students who have very low vision, who are Braille users, also have given me good feedback about using Book Creator with VoiceOver on the iPad. So Book Creator, cool on the Chromebook and iPad. Another good thing to look at when you're looking at collaborating diverse learners together. So using mainstream technology. So virtual social interaction using Seesaw's choice board. So this is so Seesaw is a platform similar to Google Classroom that I've seen is fairly intuitive and has a lot of support. It has lots of support for teachers to learn with webinars, and they just seem to really have their professional development together for teachers as well. So there's a lot of support in the learning of the platform as well. But you can use Google Slides to also, and this is good for, I think, for students, this not just Seesaw, but this activity is good for students that might be AAC users. So using Seesaws, you can kind of create choice boards using Google Slides, and then you can share the activity in Seesaw, and then you can interact with the class using Zoom. So that would be like, you know, if they wanted to make a choice about what app they wanted to use, you know, or what website they wanted to play on, or what game they wanted to play with their peers online, you could create this choice board for them and then upload it into the choice board on Seesaw, and then the students could then interact with it via Zoom. So that's just like one example, I think, that can integrate a lot of diverse learners who are who do picture you know, communication systems too. So, and can make choices for pictures. And it also is good for students that just are learning to make choices, and just anyone. So I think I like this activity as well. So just developing, you know, good virtual learning skills as well, and using the technology across neurodiverse lines. Okay, there we go. Check in.
I think this is our final check-in point. So take a moment here and thinking about those technologies that we just presented to you as things that are options for delivering information, because that's really what they are. They're platforms for delivering information to your students in a way that is usable. And I want you to bring to mind one thing that jumped out at you right away as, oh, that's interesting. I want to know more about that. And delve into the creative piece of your mind. How do you envision that in your world? And picture yourself using that technique, that tool. Creating a little movie in your mind. Let's see if you can picture maybe a student or a learner or someone, a relative, one of your own children, doing that with you. Maybe notice who came to mind and what brought that particular person into this scene for you. Maybe you energetically reach out to that person, just checking in, sending out a little bit of positivity, connection, extending your invisible string, if you will. Reminding yourself that you are still connected to this person, even right now. Gently bring yourself back into our space, opening your eyes if you chose to close them. And maybe that presence of that person stays with you. Maybe it drifts off as you bring your awareness back to our next topic.
Cool. All right. Social awareness and mindful use of technology. Do you want to do this one, Natasha? Or do you want me to? Do you want me to read the points and discuss?
That works for me.
Okay. All right. So helping a student understand that they don't know what they don't see. In parentheses, exploration of a single experience with and without assistive technology.
Okay, so this one is really particular to students with sensory impairments, both visual and auditory senses. And it's a concept that, when modeled and when given a concrete example of it, they catch on to really, really quickly. And then it's just a matter of keeping it in the forefront of a student's mind. So you can never see something through someone else's eyes. If you don't know what it's like to be able to read the blackboard from the back of the room, or to be able to see print at all, you have no concept of what that is. And you don't know that other people see it. You don't know if other people can hear a train whistle off in the distance if you've never heard a train whistle off in the distance. And so one of the ways that this can be taught is providing a student with experiences where they might be using assistive technology. Maybe it's a hearing aid, maybe it's a magnification device, that allows them to explore a situation with that device. So with their hearing aid turned on and with their hearing aid turned off. And you ensure, to the best of your control, that you're presenting as close to exactly the same scenario as possible. And this is a little bit easier to do if you have pre-recorded something for a student who might experience a hearing impairment. And with a student with a visual impairment, I like to use printed materials to demonstrate this. Go to the book Where's Waldo a lot, because it's such finite detail focus that for almost every student with a visual impairment where acuity or clarity is impacted, some sort of tool is necessary for them to experience the activity.
All right, helping a student learn which tool to use to complete an assigned task.
And this is really just teaching the function of tools and helping them understand by giving them information that you observe that they may not have access to. So if you're noticing that a student is really hunching over regular print to be able to read, and their nose is right against the page, maybe you show them a picture of that. You take a picture of it and you show it to them, or you use words to describe it. And then you present them something that is in large print, or you give them something in Braille and you evaluate and describe to them what you observe in their posture and their physical presentation and their appearance and how that looks to others. You give them the contrast of the use with the modification or technology and without, so that they can recognize which one may more closely align with social expectations to help bridge relationships with others.
All right, helping a student understand ergonomics through physical body awareness and how ergonomics affect their functional sustained use of technology.
I talked a lot about ergonomics in that last example, but it's something that they may not notice a physical difference if it's a young learner, or even right away. You're not going to notice the difference of hunching over something if you're doing a task for 2 minutes. But if you're sustaining that position that is not necessarily in line with the way our body is designed to be placed for an extended period of time, if they do it for an hour, there's going to be physical repercussions that even a young child can learn to feel and learn to notice. They feel it, but they don't necessarily care, and they don't necessarily notice it as a thing. They're going to be paying for that choice, though, even by the time they're in college, graduate school, or certainly by the time they're 40. And so helping them understand what's happening in their body physiologically when they do that, and the difference when they are using straighter posture, more supportive ergonomics, and how that actually frees up energy in their body to be able to focus on what they're learning, is a really important skill for the longevity of their education.
All right, helping students understand how not using technology might impact social emotional relationships with peers. For example, bullying can stem from a lack of use of technology.
Yep, and I've seen this happen both in my own world and in the worlds of my learners, where they don't use the technology, the magnifier, the screen reader, the whatever. They may not use the forearm crutches, and they'll just, hobble along or whatever, as they would say. They're like, oh, I make it work. And yes, they make it work. But what they're doing is they're putting themselves in a position where you're opening yourself up to unnecessary vulnerability. And there's necessary vulnerability of where it's a good thing to open yourself up and take a chance and allow people to ask questions. And there's unnecessary vulnerability where you're making yourself look so different than the expected appearance. And yeah, let's face it, appearances are important. Whether they should or shouldn't be is beside the point. We make judgments based on appearances. And so if their student is presenting themselves in a way that makes them look excessively different because they're not using a piece of technology, whatever that technology is, they also need to be made aware that that choice is acceptable and has social consequences. And by making that choice, they're also choosing those social consequences. And that may mean people saying rude things, that may mean people saying mean things, that may mean people bullying them. And it may also eventually lead to potential physical injury. And that's an exception that they're allowed to make. They are allowed to make that choice and deal with the consequences, but they need to be made aware of the potential consequences of their choice before they make the choice.
All right, and then our last point is all of these can be flipped to building empathy and support among peers, and even invite opportunities for peer advocates, for peer advocates, non-disabled peers. Sorry, there we go.
Any one of these, you can bring a typical peer into the scenario, or two people who do things in a different way even. And by teaching each other about that, by teaching each other about the consequences of choice, essentially, you are opening the opportunity to better understanding and sometimes higher levels of receptivity.
Okay. Activities for facilitating openness, tolerance, and curiosity. So a couple examples are scavenger hunts and games like I Spy. Anything, do you want to keep going, Natasha?
Yeah, just read through them.
Okay. Movement activities like obstacle courses, using colored paper, placemakers, or obstacles, be my mirror activities. Teach a peer to do a task using your AT. Have students demonstrate how they do the same task in different ways without assistive tech or with two different types of AT. Description, name the technology games where students describe a piece of tech using descriptors from all the senses, and another student has to guess what tech is being described either by naming it or finding it in a group of tech, physically present or pictures in parentheses. And then another one is 20 question type games around a particular tech item being used. So
these are really fun to do both in a classroom setting and in a small group setting, whether you're using assistive technology, mainstream technology. Teacher can even use it when they're transitioning from subject to subject in the classroom, doing a 20 questions about the lesson and have students guess what that lesson is. but it's a great experiential for people who experience something differently to use their language in any one of these. And if you want more in-depth examples or more details or want to hash anything out about any of those activities in particular, reach out to me. Happy to help.
All right. All right. So, of course, if you have questions, just like Natasha and I have said, this is a pre-recording, so you are more than welcome to, within the conference that this is a part of, and any other way we are putting this out in the internet, on the world. Yeah, feel free to, ask us questions. You could, our email address are not in this slide, but but you will find us. On where you're finding this information, you can get a hold of us, I promise you. So we make ourselves very known to where we are in life. So anyway, thank you so much for being a part of this. I'm going to turn my camera back on, I think.
Try.
I have learners at home right now who are behind me. So anyway, thank you so much for being a part of this, and let us know if there's any way we can support you in merging the concept of mainstreaming technology to support social emotional inclusion. So, all right, thank you so much.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks.